If you follow myself or RetroTech Chris on X, you've seen this color ribbon cable before. You see, Chris wanted to print some cards on his dot matrix printer, and if you have a color ribbon cable, you want to use it, right? That's living the dream, full color and dot matrix. However, like a lot of ribbon cables of this age, the rubber rollers that advance the cable have deteriorated. And this is unfortunately fairly common. Once those deteriorate, then the ribbon can't advance. If the ribbon can't advance, you're not printing, or at least not very well for a long period of time. Now, Chris did see my video where I used O-rings to replace these rubber rollers. Now, that was specifically for an Image Writer 2. Now, I've done it on other dot matrix printers, and 99 times out of 100, it works fine with absolutely no modification. However, I didn't talk about modification in that video because I was only doing it for an Image Writer 2. And unfortunately, as of right now, that's the only dot matrix printer I have that works. I do have a Commodore 803 somewhere that kind of works, but that doesn't matter. But anyway, so Chris messaged me and we were talking back and forth on different techniques. And he went out and bought a whole bunch of O-rings for it, a nice little O-ring kit at a hardware store, and tried replacing them. And he just couldn't get the results. So we messaged back and forth, and he tried two different sizes, but unfortunately it seemed that they were either too big or too small. So one of the things I suggested to him was to get two smaller O-rings and then put a bigger one kind of in the middle, right? And it would prop it up a little bit. That usually works a little bit, right? But it still just didn't work right. And I think a lot of it has to do with some interesting tolerances in this cart. You see, we have our upper roller and lower roller. The lower roller tension isn't controlled by a normal spring. It has this metal bar that's bent that comes across, and that's what pushes the upward tension. The upper roller just sits in a hole on the bottom, right? And then it has this arm that comes down that holds it in place. This arm combined with this weird tension down here is really what gave him a lot of trouble. No matter what O-rings you put on here, you'd have trouble. If they were too small, you wouldn't be able to grip the ribbon. If they were too big, they would bind, rub up against here, rub up against the arm, and just generally not work. So long story short, it wasn't worth the time for Chris anymore, and he messaged me and said, hey, do you want this? Now, it wasn't for me to fix. It was because I'm looking for color ribbons, specifically for the Image Writer 2 that have dried up because I have some re-inking experiments that I want to try. However, once I saw this, one, the ink has a good amount of life in it because my fingertips were all kinds of stained. But when I looked at it, I thought, you know what? I think I can fix this. One of the modifications I did a long time ago for, I think it was a friend's printer, after we put O-rings in, we still didn't get enough tension. And that's because, if I can reassemble this real quick, I'll show you. The lower roller is in this guide. This guide basically prevents the roller from going up too far, and it has enough motion in there that if something were to get caught, it'd be able to, move a little bit. Well, that is what was stopping us. So I took a 15/64 drill bit, and I took all the ribbon out, put the drill bit through, and just kind of worked my way up to give it just a little bit more room. Now, it would have been nice, and in hindsight, Chris and I didn't coordinate this, we didn't talk about this, but if I had fragments of the original rubber roller, I can rebuild those, do a little bit of math, and figure out exactly how much I had to grind off of this. Because I'm not sure if I did enough. I might have done too much. I was a little overzealous on the bottom, but that's not going to be an issue. The point is, now with your O-rings, Chris, I didn't change anything with the O-rings you had in here. It advances. And it advances really nice. So nice that I'm going to send this back to you. However, there's a couple caveats with this. About every 2 rotations, and I mean full ribbon rotations, and I know that because on The black stripe here, there's a slight rip, and that's highly likely from when the O-ring, or not the O-rings, the original rubber rollers failed, and it just kept banging on that same part on the ribbon, and it just had a rip. So that's where I knew my starting point was. But about every 2 rotations, it gets bound up a little bit. So what I found, if you print a little bit, right? Now, mind you, I didn't test this, so my printing is just advancing the ribbon, right? So if you print a little bit and see how it kind of stops there, take it out, slam it, right? Like an old school pack of smokes from the 50s, it'll advance again. So, oh, there is your rip. Do you see that? Right there. So, Chris, my recommendation for you is after every print, take it out, slam it a little bit. You might want to actually open it up and make sure that it's not getting bound, because what I found is when it does get bound, because these O-rings are slightly too small, the ribbon is getting pinched between this arm that holds this whole sprocket in place, because the arm and the sprocket are 2 different pieces, unlike some other printers. So that's where it'll get pushed in there, but you can always push that down a little bit. So we'll put it back on. I get a pen, push this down a little bit, and you want to make sure, and this whole part here is solely for Chris, right? You want to make sure when you get it down that lower roller is seated in there perfectly on the front and the back. And will it advance? Yep. Absolutely. I like using a flathead in here because I can get more rotations. But that's it. So, Chris, I'm going to send this back to you before and after every print. Just give it a nice little pat there. And I think you're going to get a lot of life out of this ribbon cable. So I appreciate you sending it up to me, buddy. I would have loved to do some reinking on here, but you got a lot of life in this ribbon, and you know what? It has a job to do, and it's to be printing whatever you want. So this will be coming back to you, Chris. Happy printing, and I hope everybody else who watched this just might have learned something.